Hi there, I'm Steve Best. In the fall of 2021, I was contacted by a team of wounded British war veterans who were planning to paddle the Inside Passage in 2022. They called their team Forces of Nature, a play on the fact that they had been in the forces. And my girlfriend Claire immediately dubbed them the FONz. They would be raising money for the Not Forgotten, a charity that helped them after their injuries. I put them in touch with BC Marine Trails and Washington Water Trails, and we helped them with route planning and some logistics. When shipping costs went out of control due to COVID, the trip was postponed for a year, and they ended up going in 2023. That's their route from Olympia, Washington, at the bottom of your screen, to Skagway, Alaska, at the top. They had asked for help with what they called the difficult bits. And one of those bits was the Cape Caution stretch, north of Vancouver Island. I had paddled from Bella Bella to Port Hardy in 2010, so I volunteered to paddle with them from Port McNeill to Bella Bella. Fate intervened, and what ended up happening was I paddled with them from Port McNeill on Vancouver Island to God's Pocket, and then from Bella Bella to Prince Rupert. The team launched from Olympia on May 7th, 1 week behind schedule. We followed their Garmin inReach track as they made their way up the Sailor Sea and through the Discovery Islands to Johnstone Strait. On June 2nd, they reached Alder Bay, 1 day's paddle from Port McNeill. On the morning of June 3rd, Claire and I caught the early ferry to Nanaimo and raced them to Port McNeill. That's Claire on the left, and beside her is her good friend, Linda Ash, and together they're the GTOs, Girls Together Outrageously. Linda did an amazing job of organizing things for the FONz in Port McNeill. We're standing on Linda's deck, and those specks in the distance are the forces of nature. We got down to the harbor just before they paddled in, 4 singles and 2 doubles. And marched their loaded kayaks up to the lawn with military precision. The team had 8 members, and 6 of them were wounded veterans. That's Cale Royce on the right, the team skipper and a double above-the-knee amputee. Cale has rowed across the Atlantic twice. On the left is Neil Heritage, second in command, and another double above-the-knee amputee. Neil has rowed across the Atlantic once and climbed the Matterhorn on prosthetic legs. Next to Neil is Marcus Stridham, who writes the team blog. Marcus took gunshot wounds to his stomach, plus a grenade, and was awarded the Military Cross. In front is Taff Hewitt, the oldest team member at 58, a Navy commando whose service goes back to the Falklands War and who suffers from PTSD. Bosun Marty Wilson was a paratrooper and sniper who had just been promoted to sergeant when he was shot in the head. He had to learn to speak all over again, and now the team jokes that they can't shut him up. Dr. Barry McKenna is the team doctor. He's a GP in Devon, ex-SAS, an aeronautical engineer in a former life, a survivor of viral-induced paralysis, and one of the smartest people I've ever met. In his spare time, he races 2-man kayaks in 200-kilometer flatwater marathons. That leaves the two unwounded members of the team. Theo Jones is the team manager and navigator. His day job is navigator on a super yacht based in Saudi Arabia. One of the original wounded team members had to bail when he was injured before the trip. Sean Rogers, the team's sea kayaking instructor, stepped in and came along. Sean has a sea kayaking business in Cornwall, in the United Kingdom, and instructs and guides in Cornwall and Greece. The team had a 2-day break in Port McNeill, doing resupply, repairs, and R&R. And Port McNeill did a great job of hosting them, letting them camp on the village green right beside the boat launch, giving them free pizza and beers at the Devil's Bath, a local brew pub seen here, a barbecue, and dinner on the other nights. Breakfast every morning, and featuring them in a full-page article in the local paper. On the morning of June 6th, it was time to get up and get on the water. Our objective today was to paddle from Port McNeill, at the lower right, to Cattle Islands, just before Port Hardy, a distance of 29.2 kilometers. Launching at low tide and paddling out of the harbor. Rounding Ledge Point with little tide races all around. Conditions were glassy calm as we paddled up the shore of Queen Charlotte Strait. We stopped for lunch on the beach at Clixiwi Resort, a First Nations resort and campground west of Port McNeill. Conditions remained pretty calm until we passed Port Hardy Airport, and the afternoon headwinds kicked in. The last stretch to the Cattle Islands gave us a bit of a workout. That's the White Shell Beach at the Cattle Islands. And here we are, landing on it. After a month of paddling up the Sailor Sea and the Discoveries, this was the FONz first real sand beach, and they were thrilled. The beach is beautiful, and there are good upland tent sites amongst the trees. I recommend this site if you're camping near Port Hardy. Wednesday, June 7th. Our track today, the yellow one, would take us around the headland just before Port Hardy, across Hardy Bay, then along the south shore of Galetas Channel to Songhees Creek, and then across the channel to Bell Island in God's Pocket Provincial Marine Park for a distance of 24.6 kilometers. Paddling around the headland before crossing Hardy Bay. Along the shore of Galetas Channel, we were in and out of a fog bank. Before stopping for water at Songhees Creek. We knew there was no water at Bell Island, so we wanted to top off before crossing to the low coastline north of Queen Charlotte Strait. Leaving Songhees Creek, the fog had burned off by the time we were paddling toward Bell Island. Landing at Bell Island and another White Shell Beach. Many of you will have paddled in God's Pocket, and you'll know that Bell Island has nice camping on a flat terrace on top of a high midland. Bell Island is a strategic jumping-off point for crossing Queen Charlotte Strait. And this is where things started to come off the rails. Two things happened. First, the marine forecast was calling for 2 storms in a row to hit Cape Caution. And second, one of the team had a ripped neck gasket on their dry suit. We spent the next day in camp, listening to weather reports and debating options. In the end, it was the neck gasket that cinched the deal. We weren't going to tackle Cape Caution without intact safety gear. Elizabeth Purdon, who lives in Victoria, shipped a spare gasket and a super repair kit up island to Port Hardy. And we were paddling back to Port Hardy to get it. So, on Friday, June 9th, we paddled back to Port Hardy, the purple track you see here, to Scotia Bay Resort, a campground just north of Port Hardy. Arriving at Scotia Bay. That's Bud on the right, and his wife Diane beside him, the owners of the resort. The neck gasket hadn't arrived yet, so we had to stay over until Monday, and they were great hosts, even serving up a fish barbecue for the lads on our last night there. The campground is really nice, and it's a great location for a jumping-off spot for God's Pocket. So keep it in mind if you're planning a trip there. On Monday, the neck gasket did arrive. The forecast was still for storms off Cape Caution, so, to everyone's great disappointment, the decision was made to take the ferry to Bella Bella and carry on from there. The FONz invited me to carry on with them to Prince Rupert. I hadn't paddled the stretch from Bella Bella to Prince Rupert, so I was easy to convince. The two doubles paddled across Hardy Bay to the ferry terminal, while Bud loaded up the 5 singles on his flatbed trailer and drove us over to the terminal. Reloaded them on the ferry's trailer and spent Monday night camped just outside the terminal gates. Up at 5 a.m. the next morning to break camp and board the ferry. Rounding Cape Caution, we decided we had made the right decision not to be paddling here today. Pulling in to McLaughlin Bay Ferry Terminal, 2.5 kilometers south of Bella Bella, we spotted the First Nations canoe with an all-woman crew waiting to escort us to Bella Bella. Also waiting for us was our guide, Michael Luce, an American kayaker from Dayton, a small town in southeast Washington. With his late brother James, and various others, Michael had paddled 20 trips on the central and north coasts of BC. As well as being a doctor, Michael turned out to be an expert hand at replacing dry suit gaskets. It would be a short paddle today, just 2.5 kilometers from the ferry terminal to the village of Bella Bella. Here we are, being escorted to Bella Bella by a canoe full of First Nations women and the RCMP police boat. We joked that this is the first time that these guys had been escorted into a town by the police. The FONz stayed over one night in Bella Bella, camping behind the hospital, doing a resupply, and replacing the neck gasket. Elizabeth Purdon is a doctor, and thanks to her connections with a doctor in Bella Bella, the village did a great job of welcoming the FONz, with a speech by Hereditary Chief Keith Gladstone, and a salmon feast and dancing in the big house. There are 3 options for paddling from Bella Bella to Prince Rupert. There's the regular inside passage route that the ferry and most marine traffic takes. That's the broken line that you see on the right. There's the outside route up the open shores on the left for the really adventurous. We took the middle route you see here, the same route Susan Conrad took the previous year. On the morning of June 14th, we paddled north out of Bella Bella, rounded the lighthouse at Dryad Point, and paddled west along the shore of Seaforth Channel. At this point, we are still following the main route of the Inside Passage. Leaving Bella Bella, the lighthouse at Dryad Point ahead in the distance. After rounding Dryad Point, we began to feel the headwind blowing down Seaforth Channel. There's the ferry we took the day before, now on its way back from Prince Rupert. As the afternoon wore on, the wind picked up in strength. Until we called it quits after 20.5 kilometers and set up camp at Denniston Point West, near the mouth of Seaforth Channel. The next morning, we crossed Seaforth Channel and wound our way north through islands on the east side of the Inside Passage to the campsite at Dallas Island. The beach with the tide out in the morning. Heading through channels between the islands north of Seaforth Channel. Here, I'm trying to match Dr. Barry's perfect paddling technique. We stopped for lunch in a Heiltsuk First Nation cabin at Cockle Bay. You should get permission before staying in this cabin, but the BC Marine Trail map notes that there is a good campsite nearby. After lunch, it started to rain. On a sad note, I had lost my treasured hat overboard in the headwinds the day before, so I had to resort to my dry suit hood. Our destination for the day was the beach at Dallas Island, a kayak bill campsite. Coming in to land, the beach at Dallas Island in the rain. On June 16th, we paddled north along the west coast of Dowager Island and across the channel to the south shore of Swindle Island. At this point, we left the main Inside Passage route and were heading up the middle route. We then paddled through Higgins Passage to the campsite at Higgins Passage West. Paddling up the west shore of Dowager Island with Swindle Island in the distance across the channel. Stopping for lunch at Pidwell Reef on the south shore of Swindle Island, also known as Brown Sugar Beach. Carrying on along the south shore of Swindle, and calmer waters in Higgins Passage. Our destination, the beach and campsite at Higgins Passage West. Landing at the beach at Higgins Passage West. June 17th would see us paddling up the west side of Swindle Island, then across to Milne Island, just off the south end of Princess Royal Island, for a distance of 22.5 kilometers. Rain continuing in the morning as we set off. Paddling up the west coast of Swindle. Here's the landing on the north side of Milne Island. Landing on Milne. The first paddlers to arrive were treated to an extraordinary sight, a lone wolf on the beach. Of course, it had run off by the time the rest of us pulled up. It was still raining, so tarps went up over tents. The rain had stopped in the morning, and we were treated to the sight of wolf prints on the beach. followed by the sight of the wolf himself. He was in a playful mood, leaping around and chasing his tail before wandering off into the forest. These photos were taken by Sean. On June 18th, we would paddle through a series of smaller islands off the mouth of Laredo Inlet and on up the coast of Princess Royal Island to a site known as the Stadium, a distance of 18.6 kilometers. Launching at Milne Island and heading off in fairly calm conditions. We stopped for lunch at Monk Bay on the south shore of Princess Royal Island. Conditions remained calm as we paddled through the islands, with waves breaking on the odd rocks. This was our objective for the day, the Stadium, a former Kitasoo village site called Disju. It's unclear whether camping is permitted on the beach. The map on the Garmin app shows the First Nations Reserve not extending onto the peninsula. And there's a no trespassing sign on the trail leading inland to the Longhouse ruins, but not on the beach. That it's a strategic site is shown by the fact that Freya Hoffmeister also chose to camp here on her way to paddle around North America. The team chose to camp on the beach as respectfully as possible. BC Marine Trails is starting to focus on engaging with First Nations on BC's central and north coast, and hopefully we can get some clarity on sites like this, and alternate sites where necessary. Coming in to land at the Stadium, looking out from the beach, and sunset. June 19th would see us paddle north up the west coast of Princess Royal Island to the campsite at the Sagar Islands, a distance of 30.2 kilometers. The bay at the Stadium dries a long way at low tide, making for a long and muddy carry. Paddling up the Princess Royal Island shore with the occasional rocks to paddle through. Stopping for lunch at Helmken Inlet South. A little bit of wave action just to keep things interesting. Just a beautiful day to paddle up the middle route. Here's our objective, the Sagar Islands. Sunset from the Sagar Islands. And here's a view of the beach at the Sagar Islands, taken the next morning. On June 20th, we crossed the channel to Campania Island and paddled up its west coast to Campania Island West, a distance of 30.4 kilometers. Launching in the morning calm. Lunch at the south end of Campania Island. Rocks and channels at the south end of Campania. You can see the cloud getting lower and lower until we were almost whited out. Here's Campania Island West, a beautiful white sand beach. Coming in to land at Campania Island West. Earlier, we had passed a couple fishing from their Zodiac. They dropped by on their way back to their sailboat and gave us a beautiful salmon. The FONz had a feast that night. On June 21st, we paddled up the west side of Campania Island, then crossed to Pitt Island, and up the west side of Pitt Island to Moncton Inlet. Moncton Inlet was the campsite that Susan Conrad missed on her 2022 trip, ending up camping on a tilted piece of dock wreckage at the high tide line. So, we wanted to be extra careful to find the right campsite. Launching in the morning. The race to Alaska was on at the same time, and this boat rode past us today. That's Tina on the left, and George on the right, an American brother and sister team from Washington State and Idaho. Lunch on a boulder beach. Here's the Moncton Inlet site. It's not actually at Moncton Inlet, it's just south of the inlet. But the BC Marine Trails Convention is to name the site after the nearest feature on the CHS chart. Coming into land at Moncton, and there's a couple of tents already there at the top of the beach. These were the only other kayakers we met on this trip. They were a couple of lady kayakers paddling from Prince Rupert to Clemtu. Michael and I camped in the remains of a log cabin, and you can see Sean's tent beyond in the remains of another building. The site description might say 1 to 3 tents, but we always managed to squeeze in 10, or in this case 12, tents. Dinner time for the FONz. When we got up in the morning, the lady kayakers were already getting ready to launch. That's Heather on the left and Pam on the right, and they're from Victoria. June 22nd, and today's paddle would take us up the west side of Pitt Island to Anger Inlet, a distance of 37.5 kilometers. Launching at low tide. And at low tide, there was a profusion of marine life as we paddled along the rocky shore. Yours truly, Sean. Rock gardens along the Pitt Island shore. We wanted to take advantage of a favorable current, so we headed out mid-channel, paddling from small island to small island. But of course, a headwind came up to cancel out the current. Here's Anger Inlet on the BC Marine Trails map. Coming into land at Anger Inlet. Camping among the trees at Anger. Despite its name, a truly beautiful campsite. Evening on the beach at Anger Inlet. On June 23rd, we paddled north on up the west coast of Pitt Island and into Petrel Channel, a long, narrow, S-shaped channel that separates Pitt and Macaulay Islands. We landed halfway up the channel at the Petrel Channel campsite for a daily total of 26.9 kilometers. The beach at Anger Inlet in the morning. Paddling up the coast of Pitt Island in glassy, calm conditions. We landed at the creek at Allcroft Point North on Pitt Island for lunch and to replenish our water. As we paddled into Petrel Channel, the current was with us, and it felt like we were flying along. The campsite at Petrel Channel. landing at the boat run at the campsite. Sean's kayak is made out of some kind of top-secret bulletproof material, and he's able to drag it over rocks and barnacles without any damage. I want one. That night, Michael blew everyone away by baking a chocolate cherry dump cake in his Dutch oven. Michael started baking on trips after running into John Comantus in 2006 and watching him bake bread 30 days into a kayak trip. Sunset over Petrel Channel. On June 24th, we paddled up Petrel Channel and up to the north end of Pitt Island, and across the channel to the village of Una River, a logging and fishing village of about 50 on Porcher Island. Preparing to launch at Petrel Channel. A boat run actually makes launching a challenge when you need 6 bodies to carry loaded boats down to the waterline. We had a late launch today, waiting for the tidal current to flow our way. Here we are riding the current up Petrel Channel. Leaving Petrel Channel and heading for our lunch spot on the shore ahead. That's Porcher Island, ahead on the left, in the distance. There's our lunch spot. And coming in to land. It's a beautiful beach and a wonderful lunch spot, but you wouldn't want to camp here because the high tide will come right into the rocks at the top of the beach. After rounding the north end of Pitt Island, we came across this guy munching on sedge grass above the beach. This is another photo by Sean. We landed for a break a little farther along, and it looked like the bear had been here too, turning over boulders to look for crabs. Heading across the channel to Porcher Island. Una River is just before the point in the distance. Here's Una River from space. This was taken at low tide, and you can see how the harbor dries. The community center and the Rainbow House both figure in our story. Coming around the breakwater and into the harbor at Una River. We had met a local at the harbor, and he directed us farther up the channel to the community center. Coming in to land at the beach beside the boat launch by the community center. That's the community center with the blue roof. The red building beside it is the school, but it's been closed since the kids all grew up and moved away. That's Bobby, the local we met at the harbor. He welcomed us and told us it was kayak season, with kayakers coming through on a regular basis. He told us we could camp in the community center, and, best news of all, there were showers. That's the community center. And we camped outside and inside the hall. On June 25th, we paddled past the islands and sandbars off the mouth of the Skeena River to Kitson Island, a marine park just outside Prince Rupert Harbor. We had to hurry to get on the water in the morning before the channel dried. That's Lutz, a local sea kayaker. He was the postmaster in Prince Rupert before retiring to Una River. He and his wife own the Rainbow House Bed and Breakfast. The rainbow paint job doesn't have anything to do with pride. His wife just wanted to brighten up the gray and rainy winters. Lutz brought us coffee in the morning and arranged for friends to help us out when we got to Prince Rupert. Lutz met us on the water and paddled with us for a while as we left Una River. Paddling up the Porcher Island coastline as a couple of eagles watch us paddle by. Crossing the channel to Kennedy Island with a fog bank in the distance. We pulled in for a break at a boulder beach on the Kennedy Island shore before paddling on with the fog playing cat and mouse. There are big sandbars between Kennedy Island and Smith Island. Here's a tide race over one sandbar. And here's Sean doing his Jesus Christ impersonation by getting out of his kayak and appearing to walk on the water. We had to detour quite a ways around the sandbars before finding a channel between two exposed sandbars. Here we're crossing the channel from the sandbars to Smith Island. Whenever we had an exposed crossing, the team would form up in a diamond formation. That's Dr. Barry in the lead, with Michael and me, the two old farts, behind him. The two doubles are behind us, with Theo and Sean, the safety guys, out to either side, and Cale bringing up the rear. That's Kitson Island ahead in the distance. Kitson Island from space. And coming into land on Kitson Island. I had been warned on a previous trip that Kitson can be a busy place on a summer weekend, but this was a Sunday evening and we had the place to ourselves. There are only a couple of upland tent sites on Kitson, but there was plenty of space for tents on the beach. And tonight, Michael baked us all brownies. June 26th would be the last day of my paddle with the FONz, a 23.4 kilometer paddle from Kitson Island into the harbor at Prince Rupert. Back in diamond formation, paddling toward Prince Rupert Harbor. Prince Rupert is a major container port. It's another 6 kilometers past the container port to the marina at Cow Bay, seen here in the distance, where we ended our trip at the boat launch. And there we were met by Joan and Brent, two kayaking friends of Lutz, who had called ahead from Una River. They not only helped the FONz out while they were in Prince Rupert, they lent the FONz their van to use while they were in town, and showed up with a kayak trailer lent by Steve Millam of Skeena Kayaking. The FONz spent 3 days in Prince Rupert, camped at the Prince Rupert RV campground, resupplying, doing laundry, repairing boats and gear, and getting some rest. Michael and I hung around for 2 of those days, helping out before the long drive home. All in all, it was a great trip with the FONz, although if I had to pick a word to describe it, it would be relentless. From Bella Bella to Prince Rupert, it was 13 days straight of 20 to 40 kilometer days. After Prince Rupert, the FONz carried on into Alaska, with most of them ending their journey in Petersburg due to time constraints, although Cale, Marty, and Theo carried on all the way to Skagway. And as for Michael and me, in August we went back and finished the incomplete part of this trip, paddling from Bella Bella to Port Hardy. But that's another story. A special thank you to Linda Ash, Craig and Deb Murray, and Bill Joseph for all their help in Port McNeill. to Dr. Jan and the Heltzik First Nation in Bella Bella, to Lutz Beatty in Ona River and Brenton Joan in Prince Rupert, and to Elizabeth Purdon for her advice to the team on tidal rapids and the discoveries and her help with dry suit gaskets. You can still donate to the FONz's charity, The Not Forgotten, through their website, kayak-insidepassage.com.